Welcome to Excel Tips. My name is Neale Blackwood, and in this episode we're going to look at 3 new functions in Excel as well as an updated feature. Excel's subscription version gets updated fairly regularly, and in a recent update the ability to import CSV files has been improved. So CSV stands for comma separated values. These type of files are used extensively with data. They are a very efficient way to hold data. Many systems will create a CSV file that is fairly easy to import into Excel. One of the problems has been that Excel makes some assumptions when it imports data from a CSV file. You can open a CSV file directly from Excel, and when you do, Excel assumes quite a few things. One of the main ones that impacts finance and accounting is the leading zeros assumption. So if a column has numbers in it and those numbers have leading zeros, Excel will remove those leading zeros and actually just bring in the numbers. Now, in some cases, that's a bad thing. So for things like account numbers and mobile phone numbers, the leading zero is required. So many people use Power Query to import CSV files because that gives you a lot of control over how the CSV file is imported. But a recent update has given you the ability to remove some of those assumptions directly in Excel. So I'll show you where the changes are, and then I'll show you an example of how we can use this recent change. So under File and Options, in the Data section on the left hand side, this section down the bottom here is new, and it allows you to handle how CSV files are imported. So at the moment everything here is ticked, but you can untick all of them or you can tick some of them. So it gives you more control over the data. So when you open a CSV file now, you also get the ability to not make those assumptions, if you like. So let's go and import a CSV file that does have leading zeros in it. So this is a CSV file. It has an account column, and in that account column are leading zeros. When you first see the CSV file open, you see the normal operation that Excel would normally do, which is, in this case, remove those leading zeros. So column B, as you can see, doesn't have any leading zeros, but it actually does. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say don't convert. So if you convert, it's just like there's been no change in the CSV functionality. But if you say don't convert, it's not going to make any changes to the data. So when this now opens, you'll see that that account column has leading zeros in it. There we go. So you now have a little bit more control when you're opening CSV files. Ideally, Power Query is a great way to import CSV files because you can actually do a lot of data cleansing when you import the data via Power Query. So check out the In the Black website. There's lots of articles on Power Query. It's a very powerful feature and highly recommend it if you are working with a lot of data. Power Query, by the way, is in the Data ribbon, and it's on the left hand side, and it's in this section, Get and Transform Data. Okay, so let's now have a look at these 3 new functions in Excel. In Excel, with the subscription version and also Excel 2021, you have the ability to use what are called dynamic arrays. Now, the easy way to think about dynamic arrays are you can perform calculations on a range in the same way that you used to perform calculations on a single cell. As an example, let's say we were trying to work out if we should charge free freight. And what we do is we've got a quantity level in cell F1. So if we have more than 20, then we're going to provide free freight. So normally in Excel, you would do a single formula and we can compare A2 and we can see if that's greater than F1. Now we need to fix the F1 because we're going to copy that down, so you press the F4 function key. Okay, and that formula is ready to copy down now, and it's going to display true if freight should be free, or it's going to display false if it shouldn't. Okay, so we're going to need to copy this down. That's done via the fill handle. You can double click the fill handle and that will copy the range down. So you can see that there are a few in there that are less than 20, and so they have the word false, and all of the others have the word true because they're more than 20. Now that's what you would normally do. But with dynamic arrays, you have the ability to create one single formula that populates that whole range. So we can go equals. So I'm going to select the range A2 all the way down to A10 and compare that to F1. Couple of things to notice here. I haven't used the $, so I don't need to fix the reference to F1. And when I hit enter, watch what happens. The formula is automatically copied down to match the range that I selected. So it's gone all the way down to row 10. Something else to keep an eye on, in the formula bar here, the formula in cell C3 is actually grayed out. This is part of the dynamic array functionality. So the formula is only in cell C2. So when I click in cell C2, you'll see that the formula looks normal. All of the other formulas in that range are grayed out. Note the blue line around the range. That's denoting that it is a spill range. That's the terminology that they use. So it's called a spill range. It can spill down, it could spill across, it can spill in 2 dimensions as well. One of the things you'll face is if you happen to type something in here, so if I type a number and press enter, then you'll see that you'll get what's called a spill error. Okay, so that's just part of the dynamic array functionality. The whole range has to be empty for the spill range to fill it, so it can't have any values in it. Something to note, the IFERROR function does not handle the spill error, so you must resolve it. Okay, which is very easy. You just delete the entry and the spill range will spill down again. And there we go. That's all fairly straightforward, but if you need to use the AND or the OR function, which allow you to look at multiple conditions, then that spill range doesn't work. So let's see how we can change this. So if I put the OR function on the outside of this, you would think it would still copy down, but it doesn't. Okay, so when you refer to the range, because the OR function can actually handle a range, it's looking at the whole range in a single cell. So it's looking at all 9 cells and figuring out if any of those are true. And if any are true, then the OR function will display true. And if we use the AND function expects everything to be true for it to return true, and in this case it should return false because there are a couple of false entries in there, so you can see. So the problem is that both the AND and the OR function are working with the range rather than spilling down the range, which is what we want. Luckily, there is a new function which allows us to force the AND and the OR function to spill, and the function is called map. So it's got nothing to do with mapping, but what it does is it allows you to access every single cell in a range and then spill to match that range. Now, all of the functions we're going to look at today require the LAMBDA function. So LAMBDA has been around for a couple of years now, and it allows you to use variables within a formula, and you can then do a calculation with the variables. So to explain, it's best to actually show you how this works. Okay, so let's build the formula from scratch and see how we can force the OR function to actually spill down to check each individual cell. So equals map. I use the tab key. When I hit the tab key, it'll automatically put that opening bracket in there for me. Then I'm going to select the range A2 down to A10, comma. So what happens now is that each cell from that range is going to be provided to the LAMBDA function. Now the LAMBDA function basically expects a variable. So I'm going to give it a variable called QTY for quantity, comma. And so now I can perform a calculation using that variable name. So again, I can use the OR function, and then I can compare the quantity, so that variable, with cell F1 and close the bracket. So there's going to be quite a few brackets here. One thing to notice about the brackets in Excel is that they are color-coded. So based on the level that you are within the formula, the bracket color is the same. So you can see here that we've got purple brackets on the OR. When I do this next bracket, it's going to be red, which is the LAMBDA, and then the next bracket will be black, which is the map function. And when you're building nested functions like this, the last bracket is always black. That's it. So that formula is ready. When I hit enter, it's going to spill down and it's going to do pretty much that same calculation that we did initially, where we referred to the range and compared it to cell F1. Also notice there's no dollar signs in this formula, and it should still work. So there we go. So that's how you can get the OR function. This will also work with the AND function if you want to use the AND function, and it will spill down to match the individual cells in the range. To be honest, you very rarely, if ever, use the OR function with just a single condition. So let's see an example where we might want to look at two conditions. And that's the advantage with the map function, is you can actually define more than one range. So let's see an example where we will refer to two ranges. Okay, so there we go. So that is the map function. We'll build that from scratch as well. And what this is actually returning is it's going to return true if the quantity is above 20 or the extended price is above $100. So we need to actually perform a calculation to work that out. So let's see how we can do that. So equals map, and again I always hit the tab key, and again refer to the quantity range, A2 down to A10, comma, and now I'm going to refer to the unit price range, which is B2 down to B10, comma. So that's two separate ranges. So when you create the LAMBDA function, you need to include two variables. So I'm going to use QTY for the quantity, comma, and then I'll use unit price for the unit price, comma. So now I can perform a calculation and use those two variables in the calculation. So let's use our OR function, and the first one is the same as we had before. So we want to check the quantity is greater than the quantity level, comma. And now we can perform a calculation using those two variables. So we can go quantity times unit price. Notice as well that Excel has identified the variable, and so I can hit the tab key now to enter unit price. So as you're building the formula, Excel identifies the variables and sort of helps you build it, just like it does with the function names. And we can compare that to cell F2, which has the $100 in it. And so there's two conditions. So the first condition is the quantity greater than 20, and then the second condition, when we multiply the quantity by the unit price, is that greater than F2's value, which at the moment is 100. So again, close the bracket on the OR, close the bracket on the LAMBDA, and then close the bracket on the map. And that's it. So again, when we hit enter, that should copy down. The different cell here is in row 5, where we were below the level of the 20, but because the unit price is a bit higher, then we are actually returning true. So that's identified that that would be a free freight, and that's because it's above the $100 value. So either of those conditions will generate the free freight in this case. So the map function allows you to extract individual cells out of a range or a spill range. It will work with a spill range as well. in just the same way that we've referred to normal ranges in this case. Let's have a look at the next two functions. They're called scan and reduce. They have exactly the same syntax. They actually perform the same calculation, but they have a different output. So let's see how that works. Now, the classic example for the scan function is a running total. So you have an opening balance, and then you have a range of cells that you want to add to that opening balance and create a cumulative running total down a column. So that's what we're looking at the moment, where the scan has two inputs, the starting value or the starting position, and then a range that you want to then do some sort of calculation on that starting position. And each step returns whatever the calculation is. In this case, it's a very simple calculation where we're just adding each entry to the previous balance. Let's build it from scratch and then I'll take you through it. Okay, so equals scan, opening bracket. The opening balance for this is 0, so I'm just going to type that in. That could be a cell reference. You could refer to another cell that has the opening balance or the opening thing that you want to work with. I'll show you another example later where we actually work with text. So in this case, we're starting with 0, and then we want to add each of these amounts to that opening balance and show a cumulative running total as we go. So comma, so we have an opening balance and then the individual values, and now we have to use the LAMBDA function again, just like we did in the map function. Now this time there's two variables, so I'm going to just use x and y just to keep things simple, comma. So they're the two inputs, so the 0 is going to go to x and the individual amounts is going to go to y, and then I'm just going to do a calculation, x plus y. And so Excel is going to calculate this at each row level and return a result. So we close the LAMBDA and then we close the scan. There we go. So when I hit enter, this is going to spill down to fill that range and show me the cumulative amount. And because I started with 0, the first value is the same. Now, how it works, that's what I've got this little table on the right hand side. So when it starts out, x is 0 because that's that first argument in the scan function. And the y is the first value from the amount column in column B. And so it does the calculation, x plus y, it adds them together. Now, here's where things get interesting. On the next row, the x is the result of this calculation. So when I go down to here, in the next cell, the x variable is now the previous result, which was 17,939. And then we add the next 17,276 and we get the 35. And then that just keeps going down. So the x gets the previous rows or the previous calculations value. And then it just keeps adding up. So as you can see, it gives you the running total. So because we started with a 0 balance, the total of all these values should equal that 96,902. So let's see. Okay, so that's how the scan function works, and I'll show you another example in a minute. Now, the other function that has exactly the same syntax is the reduce function. Now, it does exactly the same calculation, but it doesn't return a spill range, it returns a single range. So let's have a look. If we go equals reduce, and again, I'll start at 0, and again, I'll refer to this range, comma, and again, we need the LAMBDA, and I'll use x and y again, and x plus y. Close the bracket, close the bracket. So exactly the same syntax as the scan function, but this is the reduce function, and this is going to return the final result, so that 96,902. and it doesn't spill. It's a single formula. They perform exactly the same calculation, but the scan function returns each individual calculation that it performs, whereas the reduce function just returns the final calculation. As another example, which is not addition, but in this case it's building up a text string, here's the scan function. So I'm starting with a text string instead of a value, and again I'm providing it a range, and again I'm just using x and y as the two variables, but this time I'm using the ampersand symbol between the x and the y, and what that does is that joins text together. So the ampersand symbol joins text together. It's like the concatenate function, if anyone's used the concatenate function. And so it builds up CPA Australia one letter at a time. We're starting with CPA and a space, and then Australia is being added one letter at a time to the end until we get to the full name. That's the scan function doing that. But if we do exactly the same calculation with the reduce function, we actually end up with the final result in one cell. We don't have to go through all of the workings, if you like. I thought I'd show you another example of the scan function with a loan calculation. Typically when you're doing a loan calculation, so I don't want to get into too much detail on these formulas, but you're welcome to have a look at this file. You can download the file from the In the Black website. So basically this is a loan calculator. So you'll notice that all of these formulas spill down. You can see that blue outline going down. So this is the cumulative interest payment. Note the hash symbol on the end of the A8 reference refers to the spill range that starts in cell A8. In a loan situation, this calculates what the interest payment is, and this formula calculates the principal payment. So together they equal the repayment, which we've calculated in cell B4. Now, typically, this is the formula you would use for the running balance. So if you want the loan balance at any point in time, this was the formula you would use. You would actually recalculate that principal, but you would calculate it for the life of the loan at that particular period. And so the principal is actually a minus figure. And so you just add that minus figure to the opening balance, which is B1, and that would give you the running balance. But basically you're recalculating that cumulative principal amount. So this is a single period cumulative principal. So it's using the same month here, or the same period number, and so it's just a single period, where this one starts at period 1 and goes to whatever period you're up to on that row. So as I mentioned, it's an extra calculation. To use this principal calculation, you can use that scan function. So in this case, the scan function is taking the opening balance of the loan, which is in cell B1, and then it's referring to this spill range, which is in column D, which is that monthly principal amount. And then we're just doing a very simple running balance after that. So we don't have to recalculate the principal. We've already calculated the principal in column D, and now we're just using it and adding it in exactly the same way as we did in that running total again to calculate the value. If I copy this formula, I'm going to copy it in the formula bar. Copy it there. I'm going to paste it here. I'm going to, again, paste it in the formula bar. So this is an easy way to copy a formula without the relative references changing. And I'm just going to change the scan function to reduce. And when I hit enter, hopefully it's going to show a 0. So that should show us the closing balance there, which it does. I've also got a min function here to check this balance column to make sure that it is equaling 0. If we do go to the end of this table, you will see that the closing balance is 0. Okay, so there's some examples of the scan and the reduce function. They are new functions in Excel that work really well when you are trying to do like running totals, things like that. The map function is great to force the AND and the OR functions to spill when you need to do some comparatives using those functions. And don't forget, the CSV file now also provides you with a little bit more control over how you bring in the data. Hope you found these new features useful. Thanks for watching.